Hi, I'm Fred Stoller. You may know me from Seinfeld, Raymond, or Dumb and Dumber. And a person who is not dumb or dumber, Kenzo Shibata. Wow. Please go to patreon.com, Kenzo Shibata, to listen to Class Time with Kenzo Shibata. This week featuring Sarah Squirm, Jake Flores, Dylan Shearer, and hosted by Patrick Winegar. I'm Dumb and Dumber, but this guy, for messing up words, names, but I checked out this podcast. We really need it in these times. He's smart, so on the money, so check it out, please.
Thank you for tuning into Class Time. This is your host, Kenzo Shibata, and for once, I will not be the host of the entire show. I'm very proud to announce that I worked as a segment producer on this particular episode because it was a topic that I did not have a lot of firsthand knowledge of. So I brought along my buddy Patrick Winegar, who's a DSA comrade and really funny, insightful guy to do the interview today. And since he was or is part of the Chicago comedy scene, mainly improv in his case, there was some specialized knowledge that he had that I just don't really have. But impetus for this episode was I'm in a group DM with a bunch of folks, and a couple of them were comedians or improv players. Dylan Shearer and Patrick were both in that group. And the two of them in this DM were having a conversation about how bad politics are in the comedy scene and why. And I thought the conversation was really interesting. And Dylan was telling me that he was developing an article about it. So he wrote it up, sent it to me. I'm like, this has to be an episode. This is something that I would listen to because I don't really understand why politics are so bad. And as it really turns out is that the issues within the comedy world are really the same as when it comes to like people who are political writers. You know, it's kind of like, you know, you've made it or you haven't made it. And those are two kind of distinct categories. And when you look at the people who made it, you know, they're either quiet about their personal politics when I'm talking about political writers, or they put out a line that would be consumable to editors and publishers. Like when they're talking on social media or they're doing panel discussions, they're not going to take on any controversial issues. They're not going to talk about solidarity because when it comes to political writers, for example, you know, there's only a few slots on the Washington Post and on the New York Times and, you know, even like the kind of more mid-tier places, and comedy is the same. You know, there's only a handful of things, and, you know, the conversation was really interesting to me that took place on the pod, but also very depressing. You know, we had, so I asked a couple comics that I like a lot to also join us. So Sarah Squirm, who does Helltrap Nightmare, which is this really cool body horror / comedy show. She was based out of Chicago. Now she's in LA. And out of New York, from Pod Damn America and the YU Mad Pod, Jake Flores. Both of them, like when I pitched the idea to them to be on the show, immediately like, we have a lot to talk about on this topic. So a lot of questions you might have about why Saturday Night Live sucks now can be answered by what you're going to hear in this following interview.
I've also been using the Epstein Island, and so whenever I do like Zoom comedy shows, the opening joke I've been doing is just like, you know, hey everyone, good to see you in New York. I know you have my New York friends. I had to go to my dad's house. You know, it's okay, he's not here. Tragically passed away last year, and like. We all have internet poisoning, so we think it's funny, but people don't know what that is. Like normal people. Yeah, I thought that was huge news.
Oh yeah,
when I did the Epstein painting, a bunch of people I was doing it on, people didn't get it, and then I explained it. They're like, "Can you take that down, please?"
My wife made me stop talking about it after, like, there was the British royal family connection, and I was just like, "What the fuck?" She was like, "I do not want to hear about this." I had a kid recently, so I'm
Oh my God.
normal now.
What a great reaction. Jesus Christ, dude. Why'd you do that?
I don't know.
I mean, congratulations, I guess.
I mean, it was 18 months ago, but yeah.
Can we see it?
She's
It's the
asleep.
giant
I'm not gonna
baby.
wake her up.
Aw.
Yeah. So me and Dylan, one of the things we talked about a lot is how frustrating it is that a lot of comedians have, if they're not right wing, just like very generic Democrat politics,
Like Rahm Emanuel Democrats,
like Rahm Emanuel type Democrats.
Yeah.
And I don't know how or why that happened. And like we always have a joke that like comedians should be disenfranchised, like they just should not be allowed to vote or have opinions about politics. And like it feels like a lot of the rest of the world has this idea that comedians are like universally counterculture and really radical. And maybe there was a time where that was true. I really have no idea. But in my experience, it's just like, no, they just have very generic politics, like just shit that they get off of cable news. Like every
I have a
other group of
lot to
people.
say.
And I knew that y'all would have a lot to say about that. And Dylan actually wrote a piece that's going to come out on Monday about his experience in improv. I come from an improv and sketch background. I know y'all two do more stand-up, so that's part of the reason why we brought y'all here.
I come from a virtual background.
And
Hey, what's this guy, a comedian over here?
so yeah, that's part of the reason why we wanted to do this, of just getting a lot of like left comedians, like actually left, not, you know, I don't vote Republican, their insight on like why you think that is and like what your experiences were with it. So Dylan, do you mind telling us a little bit about the piece that you wrote and just kind of a general synopsis, see if it lines up with Jake and Sarah with y'all's experiences, because I feel that it might.
Yeah, it's just like this short little thing I wrote, but basically like I have three main sort of points, and looking specifically at Chicago because that's really where I have the experience. But one, just sort of like improv, the demographics of it, because it's so expensive to do and because it's all on the north side of Chicago and sort of, you know, the strict segregation going on in Chicago. The north side is the white side of Chicago. Like that's one big part of it. And then the other two are just sort of like the nature of what a scene is. So maybe not specifically to comedy, but because it is like this comedic scene, that there's like the nature of that and sort of like, you know, there being gatekeepers to who has the power in the scene being a part of it. And then the third, just sort of people wanting to get jobs from this, right? Like there's a large majority of people in Chicago who are like doing comedy because they want to, you know, make it or like and move to LA or go to SNL or whatever. I think it's sort of a combination of those three things just brings sort of like this milquetoast, middle of the road sort of politics.
Ooh, I'm about to pop off.
Please.
Yeah.
Please pop off.
I have permission to pop off.
Yeah, yeah.
Not many people know this about me, but in college, for 2 years of my putrid existence, I was on house teams at the IO Chicago, doing the like
The Herald.
the Herald.
I was on a
doing-
house team there.
Yeah, you know, God bless the school to prison to SNL pipeline.
Yep.
But the
School to prison.
the private, what is it, $10,000 a year to do a class?
Yeah, exactly.
It's, I mean, in addition to everything you said, the culture has to be homogenous and assimilationist because, like, intrinsic in the like the great manifesto of Del Close, who invented long form improv,
Who like hated women.
who hated women, like alleged abusive heroin addict. I mean, cool, but whatever.
More like
No.
Dell, too close.
Yeah,
Standing so close to me, Dell.
more like too true in comedy. Barely made sense as a joke. I'm not funny anymore because of quarantine. But like inherent to the manifesto or the doctrine of improv is this like group think mentality. Yeah. The group has to achieve this like divine group mind where your minds have coalesced and you can communicate via wavelength, I guess, to create perfect improv comedy. But what that actually means is like you have to assimilate to the hoodie and flannel shirt, like zip up costume. And group mindset just means completely eradicating your point of view because you have a hope of one day being the next Tina Fey. Even though Tina Fey already lives Tina Fey's timeline, you can't wear her skin and become her. So it's this big like fucking what is that, like a multi-level marketing scheme, I guess, where I basically
100%. Yeah.
I ultimately didn't last long there because they kept yelling at me for wearing crazy outfits, you know what I mean?
I think that MLM comparison is like, I think that's spot on because it's all about like, oh, look at this person, look at your Tina Fey, your Will Ferrell, whoever, who made it to SNL. And they went through here. So like, and everyone does this. If you look at the UCB website or like the IO website, it's all, they're famous people right away. It's like, oh, if you pay in the certain amount of money, then you can too reach this level.
Improv is so funny because it's like an entire like thing, like an entire world that there's like one job. Everyone's just trying to get on SNL. There's like one show
or the
that
cruise
does
ship
comedy.
Yeah, right.
No more. Those are out there. They don't do those anymore. They got kicked off.
Dylan, one of the things that you brought up in the piece, because and Kenzo, I'm assuming you're going to link to this in the comments or something when this goes out, but was how there's like two tiers of reinforcement of like bad politics, I guess. And like, first of all, like what do you mean necessarily by bad politics? And also like there's a way that it's reinforced personally, like in interpersonal relationships, and also just like in the structure of it. So like could you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess so. First, like bad politics. Like I was like, for this, I don't mean Republicans generally, because like we're in Chicago, sort of, if you like call yourself a Republican, that's sort of like you're on the outs basically.
Right.
So everyone calls themselves a Democrat. But sort of like it's that Democrat in name only type thing. It's sort of like aesthetically Democrat, I guess is one way to say it. So it's sort of like you have no class like lens on how you look at it. Like a lot of people sort of like they don't mind that, performers don't get paid, or there's no real sense of like what it means to be like poor in Chicago, things like that. So it's like they're very pro-choice, which is great, but like beyond what pro-choice means for like non-white people isn't something like a lot of people think about. Or sort of like the power relations of, Sharna to everybody else, like what that means for like comedy, essentially.
A lot of ROM 2015 votes in the room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A lot of them were like, I don't know if you guys remember this old like Twitter account, like the ROM, there's this ROM parody account that everybody loved. Like,
God damn it. Yeah, I do remember this.
And then the other, I guess the two, like the personal.
Former editor of Punk Planet was behind that.
Oh, cool. It was very punk.
Yeah.
The pro ROM barely comedy account was extremely punk. That was the first thing I thought about it.
And then the other thing is like the sort of the personal level of you're out there like fighting. A lot of people are sort of like they're fighting for a place in Chicago comedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want to make the scene, they want to make a Herald team or whatever. They want to make main stage Second City, and so you're sort of personally like bringing back what maybe you really believe. I don't know, because that there's gatekeepers who are like looking at what you post on social media. Like if you piss, I don't know, like I'm not gonna name it, like you piss fucking Joran off or whatever, then you might not be put on a Herald team or something, And then there's this second level of the owners of these theaters still have very much like a personal hand in what goes on in their theaters. They're not some sort of invisible person in the background running the business. Like Sharna goes to shows, and if she doesn't like you, like you can get kicked off of a team. Like
it would be funny if there was a silent partner in the improv school and it was a mime because he's a silent partner. And he just holds the money and
mind
no.
So I think those sorts of two levels basically is what I was talking about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly feel triggered from this. Like I'm feeling like hot and panicking because I was there when I was like 20 figuring this stuff out. And ultimately with Second City and IO, if your ultimate goal is to be on SNL or Second City, you're either A, striving to be a part of a television show that has ultimately the worst politics, literally, of that Trump.
Yeah.
Trump was on SNL, like
Dancing to
baseline.
Drake.
Yeah, or you're on Second City, which is a tourist attraction for like, God bless them, but like, grandparents from Indiana coming to Chicago for the weekend, what do? They all just, go to Second City and go to Giordano's. So what you're striving for is you have to be on an improv team where you have to wear the same clothes as everybody else. You can't deviate in any way. You can't attract attention to yourself in any way when you're on a collaborative team. So you forge no point of view or like voice of your own because you're afraid of not getting a big job in an institution that if you express your politics within those institutions, you'll get kicked out. Like the big Peter Kim, Scott Moorhead debacle. Do you guys know about this?
Moorhead sued Second City because he was like, they thought it was, because he was white, he thought they were discriminated against him for like that reason, right?
Wow, yeah, improv.
Yeah, Scott Moorhead sued Second City because
he's like, they're being prejudiced against me because I'm middle class, which is a thing that's not allowed here.
Literally, someone called him White Jesus.
Yeah.
A non-white person was like, who do you think you are, White Jesus? And he sued. And the theater defended him.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter Kim, who is like one of the funniest guys ever.
He's very funny. Korean American comedian. Yeah.
He was complaining. He's like, hey, the audiences heckle me and say racist things. And the theater was basically like, deal with it. So people vying to get on teams at institutions like this are going to basically, lobotomize themselves in order to get a job to ultimately get what? I don't know. They think this is fame. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, so they get to the chance to do, like Trump kissing Putin sketches on SNL.
Well, yeah, like what is that brass ring? Like what is, is it the culture of the comedy community that creates this honestly shitty stuff that we see on SNL? Or is it the shitty stuff on SNL that creates this comedy culture because like we feel like we have to accommodate it? So I don't know if you could expound on that a little bit, Dylan, and of like what you think the cause of comedy on mainstream TV is, and like what can we do about it?
I don't know if I can answer that second question.
Yeah,
but
what is to be done?
Yeah,
what is to be done?
The first question is so hard, right? Because you do see like a lot of people coming up now, like what you watch is the current, like the Trevor Noah Daily Show, or the John Oliver Show, or like the Sam B Show or SNL. Like those are all like jobs like where you could get writing jobs on those shows from like doing improv or sketch or stand up or whatever. So you see a lot of that, and these shows aren't going to hire people generally who are going to rock the boat. Like because it's not just like the head, like Trevor Noah's not hiring every single person who's on a show. But, like the producers and stuff are all also like looking at and hiring people. And they don't want someone who's going to be like completely fuck everything like in the world, like all this is bad, right? So that's part of the reason I think is just because they do look at like places like Chicago to hire people. It's not a complete pipe dream. So I think part of it is just because they're network comedies, right? It's big money, like ABC, NBC puts, millions of dollars into these things. They're not going to put a left-wing like view on it.
Sarah, you were based out of LA currently, so you probably have a more close-up insight on like how getting a job really influences comedy. Like, how have you seen that play out in LA?
It's interesting. Well, there's a sickness happening where I think that for some reason, how I'm afraid I'm about to get too out because you're asking me a specific question, but
I don't want to get you in trouble, but you know.
I mean, it's hard to not get psychedelic sort of instantly with this because for some reason it's very trendy to be a comedian right now. It's like, I don't know why people think it's cool, but it is. It's a life of suffering and hanging out with the worst people I've ever met in my entire life. So I don't understand why it instantly became cool. But I think because of the internet becoming a thing, people can now easily like commodify their personality in order to just like get famous, whatever they think that means. And they want to commodify their personality in such a way that they can get a job, which is like inherently like art isn't in service of class like aspirations, right? Necessarily. So people wanting to get into comedy so they can get a big TV job and get rich. So a lot of times, see, now I went too far away from the original question. It's like, that's the kind of what we're dealing with right now in the landscape, you know?
People feel like they have to brand themselves.
Yeah, and just like, fuck, not be a human being. It's commodifying their personality. Not just, and that's sort of what improv does. It's like, you know, you don't have to create work to show for yourself. You can just like be the funniest guy and, you know, get paid or get money or get a career out of that. So I don't know, being in damn, how did I get here? Yeah, it's just funny. I think I shot myself in the foot a lot of ways because I make like crazy comedy with like, you know, buttholes spewing meat and stuff like that.
Well,
and
you do all the artwork too, right?
yeah, like this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
And you know, I lived in Chicago for like 8 years, like, you know, not making any money, and thankfully I get some TV jobs now. But then I heard like the fucking cartoon president guy was like interviewing my friend, and he's like, hey, you're from Chicago, you know Sarah Squirm? And he's like, yeah. He's like, well, we'd never hire for this show unless we wanted Trump to eat his own heart. So it's just like,
yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah, why not?
That would be cool. So it's this idea that sometimes the climate of comedy right now is people stripping their point of view and their personalities of things that make them unique in themselves, all in the service of like capital F fame or whatever television job they want to get. So it's all like assimilationism. I don't know.
Have you ever felt that you've had to censor yourself? Because I know that like you did a lot of fundraising for Bernie in the 2020 primary. And just from my own experience, like I know a lot of comedy people that like actively do not like Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
like has this hurt like your career, or like do you feel like you have to kind of hold it back a little bit, or
you know, something that's kind of crazy because I keep using this phrase again, it's the only thing I can think of, because there's so much commodification of personality in service of like having a personal comedy brand or whatever. Right. I was actually afraid I was afraid that people would think I wasn't doing it in good faith. You know what I mean? Like there's this fear that I was like, oh, look, there's the Bernie comedian in LA. Like she's doing all these Bernie shows. Like that was true. That was like, I felt self-conscious that was even a fear of mine, but I think it just speaks to like the psychopathy of what's going on. But
people do accuse comedians and artists of doing that, but it's a dumb thing to accuse someone of, because who more than an artist needs fucking healthcare that's not tied to
right. And I was gonna
say that's what me and Patrick, we're talking about something, but it's like I think a lot of comedians, especially like in the early stages of trying to make it or whatever, think of themselves as comedians first and not as people who have jobs, which is part of it, right? It's like even if they're working as a waiter, or, you know, you're working a desk job, whatever, you don't think of yourself as that. You think of yourself as a comedian, which for a lot of people is somehow beyond needing like Medicare for all. Like, because you think you're eventually going to become, you know, rich or whatever. Like at this point, you don't need to show solidarity or whatever with it.
Comedians are definitely temporarily embarrassed millionaires in a lot of senses.
Yeah.
They're honestly temporarily embarrassed like comedians. Like they're aren't even a fucking comedian yet, most of the time.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is that comedy right now seems to be the only like artistic, I do in big quotes over here. It seems to be like the only craft, not like music or painting. It's the only artistic pursuit I can think of right now that people can see a clear path to like a capital C career, capital C money making career. Which is so like you don't see people getting into fucking saxophone thinking they're gonna get fucking rich.
Yeah, can I talk about this a little bit?
Jake,
I'm only in a lot.
I wanted to ask you about this because you come from a more traditional stand-up background, and like me and Sarah and Dylan have all gone through like these theaters in Chicago. Chicago is very like theater based, where like sketch based, but stand up seems like so like everyone's an independent contractor,
Yeah.
So could you expound on that, and like how does that influence people's politics, them being so alone like in this?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what really comedy has these kind of two modes, and they're both bad for separate reasons. The stand-up world is very individualistic, and I think that that's honestly a part of it, because when I first started stand-up, I noticed that like everyone in stand-up basically is very career oriented, which is weird because it's an art form. And when you talk about other art forms, like I also hung out with like musicians and played a little music and stuff like that. And like the guys in punk bands and shit aren't sitting around going, the only reason we're doing this is try to become whatever the fucking equivalent of Tina Fey is in punk or something. It's very much more understood. You're a human. You're making a thing you like. You have a job. And this is the main thing. If you're in a fucking punk band, you don't sit around lamenting that the fact that you have a day job somehow cancels out the merit of your art. But stand-up comedy is psychological torture that you do to yourself, MK Ultra style, and you really, really fuck with the nerve regarding like your ego. And it heavily, heavily functions around validation. You're literally getting on a stage going, the game here is to get people to approve of me by clapping and laughing and stuff like that. So I think that's a big part of why it puts people into these situations where they're competing with their peers, and they constantly feel as though, they can't justify this insane thing they've done with their life by pursuing, what is a ridiculous thing. Like, we all get 6 months into this and immediately forget what a ridiculous thing this is. This is, I destroyed my life. I should not have done this. This is an insane thing to do with, your career aspirations or whatever. But once you're already that deep in it, you kind of, at that point, it's like, you can't grasp with the reality of it unless you can justify it by going back to your parents or whoever, or just the world itself, and going, I can prove that I am a comedian. I have a capital C in front of my comedian name on Facebook, which is my first name on Facebook. And
I'm going to kill myself.
Graduated from School of Hard Knocks. Boss at me.
And you have that because you got a job, right? And I think that there's a couple of reasons why that happens. One of them is the individualism thing. Another reason is that the people who represent the art form of comedy are the people who make it to LA and New York. And when you get there, I came from Austin. That's where I started doing stand-up. I lived, elsewhere in Texas and stuff. Austin is even kind of bougie for Texas. But, I hung around people who did stand-up because they hated their job, and it was a place to hang out on Friday night and, shoot some steam and blow off some steam and shoot the breeze, or shoot some steam and blow off the breeze, whatever you want to do. And, they maybe harbored a dream of like winning the contest or something, or getting whisked away. But generally there was a big gap there. There was an understanding that probably won't happen. And at the end of the day, it's you're just having a good time. But when you get to like a New York or LA, suddenly like everyone's very professional, and everyone is, thinking about this thing in a much different way. And when I got here, the thing that I was already kind of into left shit and class politics and stuff like that. So the thing that jumped out to me immediately was like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't the top of the mountain. This isn't just like everyone who's best from somewhere else gets here. It's if you're rich, you can do it here. And there's tons of people in New York that suck at comedy. They're in the comedy Illuminati because it's more about how much time you have to hang out and all this stuff. And so the whole culture around it is very professional. It's like Thomas Frank shit. Like, it's people that are also authors just because their fucking family is a publishing family or whatever.
Right.
You know,
Ooh, he's popping off.
Actually, I think Dylan references Thomas Frank in the thing that he wrote, from what I remember. I think.
Well, Thomas Frank makes a really good point about how the really deceptive thing going on with professionalism is that the way it's set up is, if you're already rich and you live in America, which is a place where like everyone is constantly trying to convince you that like money does not equal privilege, it's all these other things, right? Then you get some success, and you're in something like stand-up where it's all about validation and stuff. It's very tempting to go, I am really good at this. That's why I'm all the way up here on this part of the ladder. When Thomas Frank talks about that in Listen Liberal, where he's like, that people just do that with like professional jobs, like when they get their like fucking graduate degrees and stuff. They then reverse engineer the entire story of their lives and imagine that the meritocracy is real, and that's why I have what I have and other people don't have what they have. And you know, that's a far cry from being a fucking folk punk crusty asshole or whatever who's talking about, you know, destroying the government or whatever. And somehow you turned into this really bougie waspy asshole, no matter who you were at the beginning of this process. And it kind of convinces poor people to buy into that mentality too, and that's what really fucking sucks. And this is all very tragic to me because, as we touched on at the beginning of this, the comedian as a thing is supposed to be subversive. The idea in the beginning of time was that it goes against the fucking grain and it's like iconoclast. But tragically, with what we're doing here with all the capitalism and shit, it turned the whole fucking thing around and inverted it. And now the comedian is a person who's doing the exact opposite of that. And part of that is because of the mechanisms of like marketing. So one thing you're doing as a stand-up is thinking shit up, writing it down on a notebook, going in front of groups of people and testing it, and then your act gets like honed through what they responded to. So you can really lose sight of whatever morals or visions of the world you had to begin with, and you can start off as somebody who didn't think of the world this way, but eventually was so like BF Skinner box, you know, style motivated to adopt like liberal politics that you just follow those all the way to a fucking Daily Show writing job. And then you go, well, this must be true because this is the shit that's making my life better, you know? Mm-hmm. It really, it's the stand-up like track is a real test of a person's spine, and most people don't pass it. And they also hate when you point this shit out, which is weird because that's what the fucking comedian's supposed to do. You're supposed to go against the grain. You know?
The most thin-skinned people, and this is just based on Twitter and Facebook and stuff, the most thin-skinned public figures I've ever seen are stand-up comedians.
Yeah, oh yeah. And they always have a fucking banner on their thing that's like, you fucking say anything you want, man. Like, you know, it's all just jokes or whatever. Those people get freaked out so hard. Good.
Not to like sound like a Marilyn Monroe calendar or whatever, but like, you know, what's right isn't always popular. And Jake, like you were saying, it's like lunatics who base their entire self-perception on affirmation from others. And so if you have politics that are not necessarily always popular, if you're in front of a room full of people, whether it's in fucking Brooklyn or like you're doing a club in like Minneapolis, if you know, saying things that you believe in on stage in front of a room full of people who don't agree with you isn't always going to work for comedy, laughter. And people get really fucked up about that, you know?
Yeah.
Well, it's like it's easy to do jokes that are like, oh, Trump is bad or whatever, like Trump is orange. It's like harder to do jokes that are, you know, like you actually are thinking about sort of the politics in general.
Well, that's another thing.
I think.
There's another thing that plays into this, which is just who the audiences are, because comedy is not a thing where we do not have a dystopian government that takes everyone in society and randomly sorts them into stand-up audiences and then throws comedians in front of them. It's sorted by things that are predetermined. So like one of the reasons I think that white guy, anti-PC, everyone's triggered comedy is so popular is because the types
This
of
is
people.
hilarious.
I mean, objectively, come on, who's gonna argue with that, right? It's because the types of that shit comes out of like the Comedy Cellar and the Comedy Store, and the types of people that go there to be in the audience are, fucking guys who take streaming videos of themselves in their truck yelling about Facebook politics and stuff.
That's an interesting point, because if you go to like a random improv show in Chicago, the only other people in the audience are other improvisers generally. So usually just like playing for
Just doing
other
shows for other people, which is fine. Honestly, I
Yeah.
think it's like not a lot of people like improv, and I totally get it. But like, it's a dumb hobby. It got turned into this like commodity. It will
Yeah.
change your life and make you famous, and that's where a lot of the fucking problems started.
I mean, there's a lot in New York. There's too many comedians and no audience, and it's a social norm or a norm in the stand-up world that there aren't audiences in open mics. In Austin, where I came from, there was an audience. They parked it in off the street on 6th Street, and then you test your material on people. But here, you test your material on other comics, and it's understood to the point where it gets weird if a human walks into the room. Everyone goes, no, we're doing comedy in here. You're not supposed to be in here, right? So for that reason, that has an interesting side effect, which is just, I think that's why there's such an interesting alt scene here, because you're doing comedy for other comedians. So it's, instead of A to C, it's like A to X or whatever, because everyone understands what you're what the pretext is for what you're already talking about. And that isn't entirely a bad thing. I really like all the weirdos in the Brooklyn scene. But they're motivated by something different, and it ain't money, I'll tell you that. Here's another thing about the types of comedy that appeal to different people and function in the capitalism thing is there are a lot of people for whom money isn't even a motivating factor because they just already are rich, I think.
Yeah.
So you can do whatever you want once you're already there. But if you're grinding at a day job, or you're just really careerist and you just really want a job, these things are going to be tempting. They're going to tempt you to adopt points of view that you didn't actually have to begin with. And I mean, you can really see that, when you see I was thinking about this the other day. Sometimes you just see comedians, you go, when you started, did you imagine you would be a t-shirt salesman or whatever fucking crazy? Sometimes I know
A puppeteer.
comedians, yeah, or I don't comedians that are just they got bored of stand-up and now they're just doing a traveling one-man show about I don't know, science or something. You're like, this is so far removed from stand. It's not even bad. I'm just saying it's so far removed from what the original idea was that you go wow, you really have to understand how much the motivating factors in this thing just get you farther out from the fucking coast,
But Jake was talking about audiences in different places. I think that's and who goes to live comedy shows. I think that's important because if you have a lot of money, if your parents are rich, you can you're not tired because you don't work, so you can do whatever bullshit stand up you want to do. Right, and there's no consequences. So even if you're not doing improv, it still costs money to be a stand-up. You're not taking improv classes. So a lot of kids are rich in New York, and that they can only be good stand-ups if they have rich parents.
To take one, isn't Nick Kroll's dad insanely rich?
Yeah.
He's able to rent out a loft in New York or whatever, and then he and just all those guys are able to just do it out of there, and they don't have anything to worry about.
Yeah.
The first second, I was worried that Bernie wasn't going to win. I know, I was really optimistic this time.
Me too.
Yeah.
I went on tour. Eric Andre did a big tour, and I opened for him for a month, bragging. But we got to do shows New York, California, and then the South and in Minneapolis, and I would talk about Bernie every single night, and the Bernie shit would fucking bomb ass, would bomb fucking shit ass fuck in New York and California, and it would rip in Raleigh or Nashville.
Yeah, no shit, right?
So it's
I'm from Alabama, and everyone I know from college, huge Bernie people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if you're going to fucking New York because you want to be a fucking stand-up comedian, guess what? You're just around rich people who have shitty fucking politics. That's who the audiences are gonna affirm that. Your cohorts are gonna affirm that. Your community class consciousness is gonna fucking shit ass. It sucks.
Well, part of this is something I talked to Dylan about a while back, but I'm from Alabama and my family is Democrat. If you're a white person and Democrat in Alabama, like that's already, you can't see this on the podcast, but I'm patting myself on the back. It's like, oh, okay, I did the bare minimum. Great. Right. You go to Chicago, everyone's a fucking Democrat. Ed Burke is a Democrat. Rahm Emanuel's a Democrat, and they still have that fucking attitude. Where it's like, oh, I'm great because I'm a Democrat. I'm fine. I don't need to self-examine. I don't need to criticize any dumb shit that Democrats do. And anyone that does is a Republican or something like that. And I was just blown away by that attitude that because when I moved here, it was like, oh, the Democrats fucking suck too.
It's the worst. Vote blue, no matter who people I know are comedians in Chicago.
And most adamant people my age, because I know it's a generational thing. I pretty much expect everybody over 45 or whatever to be, just like MSNBC people, but all of the under 40 people that are like that are comedy people.
Yeah,
that's part of the reason why we did this, because of why is that the case? What is the deal? What is with comedians? And
I think it. Good.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, what do you think it has to do with the competition of comedy, in addition to the obvious class element that it self sorts for people with money, but also we're you're constantly competing with each other. Right?
Yeah. I think the competition is a big part of it. I mean, we're going to ask the question, why are comedians like this? And why aren't they Bernie bros? You would think that they would be because, the healthcare thing I was talking about,
he's funny. He's the funniest comedian.
Right. Yeah. It is insane. Nobody says insane. But it's an interesting question. And, part of it is the thing I was describing earlier, the marketing thing. I mean, literally you're talking about trying to get jobs on TV networks. TV networks are owned by people that own everything, right? There's an incentivization factor there, but there's also there's just a massive culture that reinforces every step of the way these liberal professionalist sort of values. The first people that you meet and are important and are told you have to support by humanizing are small business owners who have fucking lame liberal and neoliberal values and who indoctrinate people that they take under their wings with those values. And there's also this. Okay, so I wanted to get to this. There's a metaphor that you hear at every fucking open mic because someone told it on one of the early Marin WTFs or whatever.
Oh, here we go.
Podcasts.
Here we go.
Jesus Christ.
So one of those episodes. I'm sorry.
I just had to plug Stamps real quick.
Oh yeah, Stamps.
Kenzo, are you wearing a Dark Throne shirt?
I am.
Cool.
Nice. Crabs in a bucket. Okay. There's this fucking fable that comedians all love. Somebody told it on Marin a million years ago. It's this little metaphor about there's a bunch of crabs and there's two crab fishermen. Sorry, I don't know what just happened in my mouth. There's two crab fishermen. One of them is teaching the other ones how to fish for crabs. He has a bucket. He goes, hey, when you fish the American crabs out of the north side of the river, Rio Grande, or where the fuck here. I'm making up half this parable, so I don't remember the details. When you fish American crabs out, you can put them in the bucket, but you have to put a lid on the bucket because they will climb out by climbing over each other and pulling each other out with their little claws, right? But
I see where this is going.
yeah, but the Mexican crabs, I don't know why it was racial, but I do remember it being racial. The Mexican crabs, you don't need to put the lid on, because when one gets almost out of the bucket, the other ones will pull it back down. And they don't realize it, but if they just let one of them to the top, the other one would pull the other one out with it, right? And so this is supposed to be a metaphor and a lesson for comedians about how when you get something and you get across the line, known as like making it or whatever, that you should bring your friends in too, right? And every fucking idiot in, the open mic-y stand-up world or whatever talks about this and thinks like this. And the thing is, it's a very limited worldview, because when you look at comedians who made it, they do staff up their writing rooms with all their friends and stuff like that. And they, kind of get themselves off the hook in terms of altruism, I think. But what they don't understand is that the world is a bucket and there's a billion fucking crabs in it. And your politics should be based around helping out other people that aren't specifically in the same like tribe as you. And I think that comedians really think of themselves as being part of it's like comedy as its own political movement or something. Right. So
comedians is like a repressed minority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anti-comedian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The oppressed minority of like doctors' sons and daughters.
Right.
Right. And I mean, rich artists have this in general. This isn't specific to comedians, but like when I lived in Austin, I would rail about this all the time, because everyone there was just up their own ass because they were a musician, and so there was a fucking health insurance program for musicians. So if you were a musician and you could prove that you played a certain number of shows, then you could get access to this pool of money that was filled up by rich donors when they had like these yearly fundraiser concerts and shit. It's called HAM, Health Alliance for Austin musicians. And, it seems like a good thing if you're a kind of a young liberal and you go, well, that's funding for the arts. That's good. Those people need health insurance, right? But everyone stopped there and didn't go on to make the argument, wait a minute, everyone just fucking have health insurance. It shouldn't be a problem to begin with, right? I used to do a joke about it. The joke was Health Alliance for Austin comedians could be called Hack, and then I would go on from there. But like, that like idea of artists as like a group that have their own interests and are somehow separate from the rest of society, really like it mirrors just the way professionals think of themselves in general. Because you talk to people with college degrees, they just give you that Thomas Frank shit, and the making it thing kind of is the college degree.
They don't think of themselves as a worker. They think of themselves as this specific.
As a philosopher king.
Right. Yeah.
Smartest person in the room.
I mean, I only have one anecdote, and I swear to God, I don't want to like drive the discussion too much, but this does connect with that. Kenzo and I know each other from Chicago DSA labor group. And one of the projects of the labor group a couple of years ago was organizing Second City's kitchen.
Oh, with Ryan.
Yeah, with Ryan.
Okay.
Ryan Andrews was a friend of ours. He was a bartender there, and there were other people there who were DSA members or connected to DSA, and they tried to unionize the kitchen. And what we were told, I was not directly involved, I was more indirectly, because I went to meetings and stuff about this. One of the things that we learned was the hardest people to reach. I guess it would be what, fives on the scale, Kenzo, for you?
Depending on who your organizing director is.
Threes or fives?
Fours or fives.
Okay. The people who were absolutely no on union were the wannabe comedians.
Yeah.
Because they did not think of themselves as a person that worked in the kitchen. They thought of themselves as someone that was going to be famous one day, and if they pissed off the boss, that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
Scabbing in many forms is also like very normal just in stand-up, because you're getting booked on spots,
Yeah.
So like everyone's like the system is, everyone understands, oh, if someone loses a job, you're allowed to go.
That's your job now.
Yeah.
This is kind of a general question too, like leading off of that, like, have any of y'all really noticed any kind of class consciousness in comedy? Just because, like, I know that UCB, like, there was a huge issue with UCB of them giving like a drink token to stand-ups that weren't even affiliated with the theater. They were like, literally pain and exposure. And there was a debate about this. Like there was a debate about IO. I was on an IO team briefly, and we had to pay our own coach without getting paid by the theater, which was kind of fucked up. And like these, like, why was there a debate? Like,
Right.
why do these conversations constantly have to happen? And like, why isn't there this kind of class consciousness in
There's like, how I think about this, like, how could there be any class consciousness with like psychopaths who are obsessed with like stand-ups just want to get up in front of a room and say shit, and they're like, okay, this is literally genius what I just said, it's the funniest thing in the world and it's right. And they don't have class consciousness because they don't have consciousness with any other group. They're alone. They're like,
you see that somewhat at improv too. I mean, and this obviously isn't true for anybody, but like a lot of times you'll see, like climbers or whatever at improv, right? So you'll do an improv class with someone. You do it for 8 weeks or however long the program is or whatever. You hang out with them you hang out 3 hours during class, and then after class you'll get beers or whatever. But then the second you stop doing classes with them or stop doing a show with them, they don't talk to you anymore because they see you as sort of like something they can use in the community, right? So it's that sort of thing. A lot of people don't go in this seeing other people as like just people who they are friends with. They see them as like people who they can use potentially to further their improv.
Someone you could use for improv comedy.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Like
It's
that's how
ridiculous.
low of a
Yeah.
creature we're talking about here.
I think that there's also a component to this where, one of the reasons there isn't like something like a class consciousness or a solidarity is that there's no scarcity in comedy. This is not a thing that is in demand, and we are not workers who have to do this to survive. This is a thing that people want to do. So it's all reversed in terms of like capitalist shit. Like you're competing to get to do the job. So it puts you in like kind of a different type of competition with other quote unquote workers or whatever. But yeah, I mean, this isn't the fucking thing that it's superfluous. It's unnecessary, That's why I think it's like hilarious just when people, I don't know, man, when people do like funds and shit and like bailouts for comedians. Like you're also a fucking waiter.
Right.
You want bailout for waiters, you dumbass. But
or just get a job. If you don't have a job, then get a fucking job. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. Because I'm not clean. My hands are not clean. Like I've performed at the Chicago Comedy Bar because I needed $40, even though I knew that the owner like threw a brick at his girlfriend's head. You know what I mean? It's like you make all these mistakes in comedy because you're so fucking broke, and you'll do anything for $1 that like. Because, I like quit my job. I'm like, all right, I'm a comedian. I'll just fucking quit my job. And now I'm dancing on a bar for tips in Cleveland after a comedy show because no one paid enough ticket. No one bought enough ticket. I've done a lot of things like, because comedy leaves you so broke and fearful too.
Right.
Like you're always afraid that you're afraid. The competition breeds fear. You're afraid you're not going to be affirmed by bombing or by your peers. So like it's discouraging that there's no solidarity because people are so afraid. Like that's not a good harbinger of things to come, especially now.
Yeah, that's why one of my kind of main things in comedy is trying to normalize the day job thing, because it's what do you call it? It's encouraged for you to, to not tell people you have one, to not believe you have one, and it's thought of as, a signifier that you're not good at it and you didn't make it, right? But we all know that the meritocracy is fucking gobbledygook. None of this makes any sense, and I think that if you maintain a source of income outside of comedy, you're not like encumbered by a lot of these problems. I mean, fuck, I see somebody who says this, and then people go, "Oh yeah, you're bragging that you're not good at comedy." Like I'm like, this also could mean I'm just bad at comedy or something, and I'm not making enough money in it or whatever. But I do feel like that there is this thing where once you take the plunge, you do put yourself in those situations and you have your back against the wall, and a lot of times it's dangerous for you, like what Sarah's talking about. But a lot of other times you're put in a situation where now you have to do bad material or something. I have a friend who I watched go into a week at a club with a rape joke, and he hated it. And I always think about this because by the end of the week, it was just killing. And by the end of the week, he was like, I actually really like this joke. And I watched him, and I went, man, you just lost your fucking soul because that joke is making you money and it's getting you applause, you know?
Well, like the thing we're talking about, like psychological affirmation, it's like if comedians need not only affirmation from audiences or like affirmation from institutions, you know, the club system is a big thing for stand-ups because I came up in the Midwest. And so like if you wanted to make $1, you had to do the Laugh Factory Chicago, where you were having to perform in front of tourists again from Indiana or whatever. So if you're expressing like opinions that go against the grain of like fucking, you know, Duck Dynasty, you are like not going to do well at the club, but you want to work there if you want to make any money. And so like, I don't like this musician, but do you know Cass McCombs?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's boring, but he has this whole thing about like he thinks about like artists
like
as
him,
like
okay.
he's
I'm also almost 35 and have a child, so
your child can fall asleep to County Line. That's great.
I don't think I've heard that one. I'm not that into him.
But like, you know, if you think about like, he talks about like art as like, don't think about it as a gift from God. You're not special for being good at guitar. It's like a fucking craft. You do it like a mechanic fixes a tire or whatever.
Yeah.
And like comedians have to constantly do this like psychic bifurcation where it's like, just go into the club, do your work, get some money. You're not special. You're just doing a job like anyone else at the club is doing their job, like waiting the tables or whatever. Cause that's where that like rape joke crisis happens, when you don't separate your like your grandiosity from like your mechanical job as just like a fucking animatronic, you know, goofy mouse at a Chuck E. Cheese, like entertaining people. Like it's very easy to let all that affirmation go to your head because you're like, I'm a fucking god. I made people laugh.
I want to ask you about the club system because I've been to Zanies a couple of times, and like I know like what the general idea is, and it's very like homogenized comedy. Like, what do you have to do to make money in that system and like come out of that system alive?
Well, I hate to make it about this, but they said if you want to get spots here, which is like $500 a weekend, you have to first do our female funnies showcase. And I said,
shit.
no way.
Oh,
So I never made any money.
Female.
Yeah. I never made any money at Zanies, even though it would have paid the rent, because I literally I drew a line. I'm like, I'm not doing the female funnies showcase. So, like, again, that's like, you're not going to, comedians have bad politics because it's the kind of people who are like, yeah, I'll do female funnies. I get to take a bus uptown 2.5 hours so I can do 5 minutes of material in front of PR agents who fucking hate my guts. Like, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's also a real limit to stand-up in that, you know, it's somebody once told me this, the audience is the instrument, and that's why you can't practice it at home, because you don't have an instrument, right? The whole thing is reacting and interacting with an audience. So part of the reason there's this culture here is because the only way you really get to do it is through these situations, because there's an infrastructure left over from like the 80s in these dumbass clubs all over the country. And, you know, everywhere else there is an alt scene, but the alt scene has its own weird ass gatekeepers and stuff. And if you are the purest of heart comedian of all time and you're doing a super ethical anarcho-punk comedy show, it's in an empty room and no one's fucking in there, and you can't do comedy with no instrument, right?
But it's weird though, because you know, it seems like the politics of comedy, there is either this right-wing shock jock bullshit that seems to come from, you know, the big comedy boom of the late 80s, early 90s, where, you know, it was, oh, I hate PC, I want to say slurs, or
thank God that's gone.
Yeah, I know, right? That still exists today. Or it's like Greg Proops and Jen Kirkman, who like you know, they have some kind of problem with Bernie Sanders.
Legends.
Yeah.
Because he's a Russian, he's a Russian asset.
Yeah, he's a, triple parentheses Russian asset. Like what is, why isn't there an actual like left-wing comedy that ever broke through? Like that's something that has always like baffled me when I actually got on Twitter and I saw these comedians. They're like, why the fuck do these people like Al Gore? Like,
I wonder if they got that way after they got rich, right?
Yeah.
Because like that's always the thing. It's like I think about this all the time. I mean, just about Bernie. It's like there's no famous people said fucking shit. Like
I know.
all we had was like Danny DeVito and Susan Sarandon.
Right.
Yeah.
If I was a rich and famous person, oh my God.
Exactly. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a class interest problem there, but there's also like the like conservative talk radio bullshit, Fox News, MSNBC liberal bullshit. Those things are all things that people take in very passively while they're doing other shit, right? So you have to have an active interest in history and politics and things like that to really be a good leftist. Now there's kind of a bandwagon shit. So, maybe if we just build enough Chapo trap houses and shit that we can kind of get a foothold in that cultural, world or whatever. But for the most part,
the superstructure is what Gramsci called it.
There you go. Yeah.
There you go.
And not to like put my history hat on, but like a lot of it is historical, right? Like back in like the early like SNL when it was like that's like the first 2 seasons, that was the most radical shit on TV or whatever. Because stuff like hadn't been done before, mostly they were just like pro free speech, right? So that's where a lot of these comedians get their like
radical.
That's like that's where the comedians are, like bad.
Not getting censored by the government, man. That's the most left-wing thing I can think of.
And a comedian has never been censored by the fucking government since Lenny Bruce and George Carlin. These people are fighting like Don Quixote windmills about free speech. No one is stopping you from fucking saying anything, you idiots.
Frank Zappa already went to the Congress or whatever when it.
Him and John Denver, actually.
Well, I mean, it's funny. Frank Zappa is like an incredibly influential, famous musician who's totally out and totally radical. Why can't I think of that many comedians who are totally out and totally radical? Well, it's because people, who think that their personality is enough. They're psycho.
So the other thing about this is that, we're talking about people that invest a lot of their time and fucking brain into becoming a stand-up and pursuing an art form. And in a lot of ways, I think we're kind of dumb in the way athletes are dumb because we fucking you have to grind like so hard to do this. People tell you like, you want to get in because there's so much competition. You got to do this fucking, 16 hours a day. You work your day job. You got to do 8 more hours of stand-up and all this shit. And I think that's part of the reason that there aren't a lot of radical celebrities is because they're fucking dumb because they spent their whole brain, like all the hard drive space in their brain learning to act and shit. There's very few celebrities that understand that. There are a few. Anthony Hopkins has said famously that he's like, why would you ask me about politics? I'm an actor. We're fucking idiots. He's the only person brave enough to say that. But like, we're dumb. I'm so mad at how I spent so much time in my 20s falling behind a lot of people that are way smarter than me now. I'm kind of
you guys referred to like 10 books and I had no idea what you were talking about. I wrote it down.
But most people, also waste time that they could be spending understanding the world just going down other pathways and avenues. And for a lot of people, that's working a lot and watching cable news. And for a lot of people, it's just, I don't know, fucking spending time getting really good at some individual hobby or their job or something like that, which is not really people's fault, but this is a big byproduct of the fact that we're also atomized. And this thing that we're describing, class consciousness, is like a thing that in theory should be like your homework as a citizen in a place all the time, but you have to elect to do homework after you get out of school, and nobody fucking wants to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and also a lot of the homework, happens in the workplace. That where people will experience the struggle, either with a boss or something. And if you're a stand-up comedian, you don't have a boss. Maybe you have UCB, and I know that there was a labor struggle at the Comedy Store in LA back in the 70s. There was something approaching a labor struggle with UCB with comedians that wanted to get paid, and it's just interesting to me that these struggles never really seem to get off the ground with comedians, and I really don't know why that is.
Going back to what you were saying about like Ryan's brave struggle with trying to unionize Second City, it's like he's dealing with people who are haunted by the fame demon. He's not dealing with regular workers. I mean, like the desire for fame is like the individual aspiration for what is it? It's like a what's Marx talking about when he's like, why are diamonds valuable? They're
commodification, or
it's like it's like a fetish. It's like an
commodity
individual
fetishization.
It's a commodity. I mean, fame is sort of a commodity fetish because it's like, why do we value some human lives over another? Why do we heroize, Tina Fey over like just to be like timely, a nurse? You know what I mean? It's like people who are sick in the head with individual. Comedians think that their voice is enough. I don't need to learn how to play guitar. I don't need how to know how to do a skill. I just get up there and just be me. My personality is amazing. They don't fucking have any class consciousness. You can't get them to unionize. They're sickos.
The fame thing is real because, like, you can see people that are rich and still go crazy because it's like not even about money. It's just about the retweets and shit.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, when's the last time like a comedy duo became famous, right? Like that never happens. It's like one person gets a job or something. So
that used to be
like,
the thing. That used to be the standard, though.
Yeah. But I mean, like Key and Peele were famous before Key and Peele. It's not like there's never been like, oh, we're now hiring. Like these two people are now famous or whatever. It's always that individual on that level. So that like the fame thing plus the individualization is just like, man, it's like drinking bleach. It's just not good.
It's drinking bleach. It'll cure corona.
A lot better, and you should do it.
And it's delicious.
Oh my God. I mean, I'm really all fired up. I mean,
I didn't plan for this podcast at all because you don't need to prepare to talk about something that you were already talking about.
Yeah, I blew through my notes unless y'all want to talk shit about Sharna Halpern.
Yeah, what do you want to know?
So part of for anyone listening that doesn't really understand or know what the deal is with the theater system, I know at least in Chicago, and this is also true in New York with UCB, there is a theater system where students are brought in, they do improv comedy, they go to a school basically for a while, and
you pay to get on stage. Basically.
You pay to get on stage, and then you pay to perform for free for the theater. This was Del Close's system that he invented. He was also a lifelong heroin addict and did not know that this business model is severely against the law. And this is what IO does. This is what UCB does, which I think mercifully shut down. Rest in piss, UCB.
Just in New York, unfortunately, not in LA.
Oh, too bad. IO West shut down in like a ball of fire because Sharna Halpern.
Sharna Halpern's the owner operator of IO.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You pay what? How's it work?
You pay to be on stage. You pay for your.
So if you're like on a team, you have to pay your coach.
Yeah.
Essentially,
you don't get paid by the theater. The coach isn't paid by the theater. And like, this is the standard like comedy system. Pretty much everyone you see on SNL came through this system. And Sharna Halpern is like the person who is friends with Lorne Michaels that like manages the pipeline. I know that there's a Chicago Reader story about IO West, how it was the workers there were severe, like the regular workers in the bar and stuff were severely mistreated, and she just like was totally hands off, and she's like notoriously allegedly parody insane and a fucking psychopath, and no one likes to deal with her. But
Well,
like,
yeah, when people at IO were complaining about sexual harassment from teachers, she famously said that women make things up
women
for
make
attention.
things up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in a Jezebel.com story too. Like this was like widely reported.
Yeah.
Women make things up is just an advertisement for women to come do improv, right?
Yeah.
Make up a scene.
And can you believe the woman who said that was actually making that up while she was saying it? She sort of improvised that.
Yeah.
And like her response, like after that, like she got blowback from it and sort of like semi apologized for it, and like said she would like sort of make changes to the IO system or whatever, which really just involved creating sort of like a board of people already in the improv scene who are like beholden to Sharna to sort of like keep her in check or whatever, or like make the teams more diverse, which obviously doesn't do anything. And just go look at go look at the IO website and see who's on the teams right now and see if the system worked basically.
Sharna is like an embodiment of like all the like hierarchical institutions too, like whether it's like getting into getting into Sharna's like harem, or like getting cast at a club, or like getting any kind of comedy job. It's like, whoever's in power obviously is like, all bosses suck, so like obviously she sucks. And I think like this, it's like most like apparent from like the infamous Louis debacle, where like every single comedian knew Louis was jerking off in front of people for like 12 years. It was like common knowledge. Every person in Hollywood knew that Harvey Weinstein was doing more than jerking off for millions of years. Like open secrets like this are only utilized when people can like make personal profit off of them. So like comedians and entertainers live in fear all the time, and they have no like career stability. They have no, like you were saying, Jake, like health insurance. They have like really truly nothing to hold on to, and they're so afraid of the people in power because they have like no safety net, that there's no accountability ever, unless it's an opportune time.
They're also afraid of the people in power because they are jealous of them, which is what my reply guys have informed me every day of my life for the last like 5 years.
I mean, it's like, this is just out, like, I'm saying, I'm not a genius for real. Everyone realizes this, like the Me Too movement, something is wrong with it because Tara Reid exists, and like no one's listening to her because no one is like profiting off of like whatever narrative that is. But that's like, the comedians cannot ever, we had the biggest Me Too issue, right? And we still do. We still have like people in the community who are doing horrible things. Sharna.
We still have fucking Louis C.K. He's like,
he's
still the biggest comedian.
Right. I don't know. So like, isn't that the most indicative of like comedians having bad politics, of like, and then Ryan tries to unionize them and help them out, but they're still so fearful. Yeah.
I mean, it is pretty crazy. Like, I have seen multiple, if you don't want to vote for Joe Biden, you're privileged posts from comedy people. And I have seen absolutely zero Joe Biden probably raped someone that worked for him in 1993, which probably happened. I've seen zero of those posts from comedy people. And so it's like, it's really telling like where the line is on where you feel comfortable speaking out. And it is like, it's weird because I was always of the impression that comedians were supposed to push those boundaries, and yet it follows society on what society is comfortable talking about, and it never goes past it. And society is always comfortable with racism. Society is always comfortable with sexism. Society's not comfortable with socialism. Like
comedians are like politicians in that they should be insurgents, but they're actually windmills, or what's called weather vanes, when you follow which way the wind is blowing. And it's because you're encouraged to do so. There's no, profit or emotional validation in going against the fucking wind.
Yeah, because you've also like conflated your full identity as a human being with being a comedian. Like you're not a guy in Dark Throne. You're Jake Flores, and if Jake Flores says something that makes people upset, you can't hide behind your like fuck it like that. You've commodified your name, and so people are so afraid of saying anything.
Yeah, the other thing about that is the philosopher king thing, and if we are going to touch on Gramsci and like superstructure stuff, comedians have a liberal disease, which is misunderstanding the little arrows between society and superstructure. You do get convinced after a while that you are a wizard who is making society better by making good points in a funny way on stage, and it's because everyone fucking tells you that and believes that to be true. It's not really happening, I don't think. I mean, there is such a thing as like a cultural cycle and stuff like that. You can't like destigmatize things and shit like that. It's good to have a good message or whatever, to be a fucking Christian rock asshole about it. But like, honestly, you know, you as a comedian are the end result of society. You're not the beginning of it. But it's tempting to kind of think of yourself as someone who has way more sway and is kind of a hero and is not a person with a dumb fucking hobby that they're wasting their life on. So
right, saying something is an activism.
Yeah, that combined with the motivating factors in all this liberal shit is, you know, that there's an extent to which that's true if you're fucking saying something new, but all you're doing is just saying a bunch of shit everyone already agrees with. So what's the fucking point of that, you know? Because it does happen sometimes. I mean, like we talked about, like how there's no left comedians, but like Carlin was like kind of a fucking leftist at one point, and he was beloved for it, and he made great points, but he's like this singular thing that shot up the middle between these two conflicts, and, you know, it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely.
Something that scares me is that after Corona, there's really going to be an eradicated middle class in the sense that, like, you know, everyone's going to have to work at an Amazon factory after this. So, like, it's going to weed out a lot of people who would have wanted to pursue comedy or who would have wanted to pursue guitar or would have wanted to pursue any extracurricular activities, because the only people who are going to have freedom to do anything after this are going to be, like, rich kids. Yeah. So that really scares me, too. It's going to really narrow down who's talking into microphones. That's gonna make things worse.
Yeah. It's also just gonna be like happening in a fucking Chipotle because there's no small businesses anymore.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus Christ.
End on the most downer note.
We're really funny comedians.
I mean, it's a bummer to think about, but thank all of you for elaborating on a lot of stuff that I know I have complained about this to Dylan, and Dylan has complained about this to me for a long time. And his piece comes out on Monday. Sarah and Jake, thank you both for being a part of this. If everyone, what's your plugs? What are y'all doing? What do you want us to get into? I know we're all trapped inside and going to die, but like until we
I want to plug justcoffee.coop. It makes you shit your pants or something.
Sounds great. I'd love to shit my pants.
I have two podcasts, which are
podcasts.
Holy shit.
Yeah. They're my job now because of coronavirus. A show called Pod Damn America. That's a, leftist comedy podcast about political shit. I also have a show called Why You Mad, where I have this exact conversation we just had with my friend Luisa Diaz over and over and over every week. I never stop talking about this thing that we're talking about. So, if anybody wants to talk about this ever, just hit me up. I'll just turn my head on. It's the only thing I think about. And my Twitter handle is @FeralJokes, which is the letters in my name all switched around. My name is Jake Flores.
That's what that is.
Yeah, I think that's
it. Yeah, I guess I'm gonna plug. I guess I'm gonna do a lot. I did a show that happens in a bar, but now we do it on Twitch, I guess, which sucks. It's Helltrap Nightmare. The next one is sometime in May. I hate the fact that it's a live stream show. I don't remember what day it is. You can follow me on whatever at Sarah Squirm.
Cool. Dylan, what are you doing?
Oh man, plugs. I don't know. Just follow my newsletter, dylanshearer.substack.com.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in there. I'm Patrick Winegar. I'm a normal person. Please don't follow me. Leave me alone.
Show us your kid. Show us your kid.
Is it the huge baby?
It's a normal size baby. She's tall for her age. Yeah, I'll put a picture in the DM. We keep pictures of her off social media. But yeah, Kenzo, thanks for letting us do this.
Yeah.
And doing this was fun.
Release the pressure valve on shit that has bothered us.
Oh yeah, I literally didn't stop talking, and for that I apologize. But I am the
great.
female voice. Oh, did I just get you guys upset?
I was just trying to think of a misogynist joke to come back to with. I gave up.
But yeah, Kenzo, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Purchase your tracks today.
Hey everyone, it's Kenzo. I hope you liked the video. If you liked the video, please like the video down there. Please subscribe to the channel so you'll see more videos like this. I'm going to make more of these videos about cool people who are into socialism and how you can get involved.